Hi, my friends. This is Elizabeth, and welcome to Sube la Vibra. Today, our special guest is Dr. Todd Ovokaitys. Dr. Todd, thank you very much for being here with us.
Glad to be here.
It is my honor. Because you have extensive background, I would appreciate if you can tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. Well, it's fair to say that I'm a conventionally trained doctor as my background. So I did medical school at Johns Hopkins, and then did further training at Georgetown University Hospital in internal medicine, where I was also a chief medical resident and instructor of medicine for Georgetown. Then I did a subspecialty program in pulmonary and intensive care, which was the background that then led me into what I would call the energetic pursuits, where I met a very gifted woman who not only had a background in computers, but through her own health issues, basically went very deep into energy healing and even, I would call it, medical intuition. So I completed my training and then studied with her. And in my training, a meditative process resulted in a vision where I communicated to the pure consciousness of DNA, which talked about the electromagnetic characteristics of DNA and resulted in our creating a new invention. And that was done with a Scottish super genius named Scott Strachan. And we created an optical device that allowed us to make a new type of waveform that, as part of that waveform, included the concept of time reversed light. And if you reverse the flow of time, you reverse the flow of entropy. So you could look at a disease state versus a healthy state as having a different vibrational pattern. And the core instruction was to learn the types of frequency patterns that are created. And if one knows that, one could literally communicate with DNA and reverse, in a sense, the flow of time to transform unwell cells into healthy cells and to take an older cell and make it a younger cell. And that's basically been the basis of what we've done ever since. And our main work right now that will be considered leading the field would be in the area of stem cells, the ability to awaken a special type of stem cell and direct it in the body. And in a general way, the ability to enhance the energetic state of molecules, which could be nutritional for the molecules working better, being absorbed and used better to enhance their beneficial effects, and even some work in creating new forms of pharmaceuticals that may absorb better and faster, work better at lower doses, and be much safer. So a lot of territory.
Wow, I am impressed. Thank you so much for sharing with us. Dr. Todd, this channel in English is Raise Your Vibe. And you already have talked about the field, the frequency. So my question is, do we live in a world of frequency?
Yes, we do, for sure. Yeah, I mean, the basic principle of physics is that everything vibrates, whether it's a bond between two molecules at the atomic level, or whether it's large structures like a bridge or building even a whole planet. So everything is vibrating in precise ways all the time.
Yeah, because this channel is more based in science. So how can we achieve a higher vibration?
Well, there's lots of ways to do that.
Okay.
Probably watching this show, what we're going to be doing. There are very many ways of looking at that. And you're probably aware that an incredibly powerful way of doing that, over and above what we do with light, or at least in addition to what we do with light, is working with sound.
Mm.
And just yesterday, I had a wonderful chat with someone named Jonathan Goldman, who's one of the well-known people in the area of making tones with the voice. And he shared with me research of just making a simple humming sound with the voice enhances the immune system in measured biology using standard tests. It also can boost nitric oxide production in the nasal passages, and that can be protective against things like the flu of various types. I won't mention any names, but we know what one of those could be. And in addition to the science, I have been led to remember ancient tones and tonal patterns that have a very profound effect on what you would say awakening sleeping DNA. And as we do that, we remember more of who we are, have more access to our higher abilities, and we create large gatherings that have been called Lemurian choirs, going back to an ancient way this was done, where we'll have as many as over 900 people singing together. And the usual way this is done is to break the choristers into two large groups, and they sing different things. And when different musical intervals are used, it creates even more complex overtone and harmonic structures. So in terms of increasing vibration, as far as going from one level to another, the experience of immersing in one of these choirs is an incredibly powerful way. You're probably aware of the book called Power versus Force, which was written by Dr. David Hawkins, and he described a calibrated scale of consciousness, which is also, in a sense, a way of measuring someone's vibration. And a 1 point increase in that scale represents roughly a 10 times increase in the vibrational state of that person. And we've seen, as he would say, a lifetime of dedicated spiritual work might raise someone 5 points, whereas in a choir event that happens typically over 3 days, people have had a 100-point jump. So very, very high. And I think we see it may go up even over 100 points, and then it stabilizes. I think the average I found was an 80-point increase, which is gigantic for a particular experience. So the use of the tones and tonal patterns, either just listening to them or singing them yourself, especially, making it more powerful, and probably most powerful in a large group, is an amazing way to have a very rapid increase in vibrational state. Another aspect of that is that we all come in and experience different types of unresolved emotional conflicts. And some of those come from our ancestors, that we literally just are born with them. So any unresolved issue of any of our ancestors is something that, in a sense, we're born to resolve, literally. And then, of course, in the day-to-day living that we have for the, literally from the time we're conceived throughout our lifetime, various types of conflicts and stresses occur. And these can also be a limitation on how high our vibration can go, how much of our complete ability we can access. And there's an area that we call psycho-emotional medicine, which is depending upon what the person is expressing or limitations they want to overcome. There are methods for defining what those conflicts are and ways of processing that to make the unconscious conscious, to relieve the burden of those unresolved stresses. And many improvements in health and thinking capacity and creative capacity can come. Literally get more of our brain back to use using the psycho-emotional medicine methods. Then there's basic lifestyle and nutrition. And you probably know that we've created a company called Gematria that uses this laser technology that can create impulses as fast as molecules vibrate and rotate. That is, you could call it high vibrational nutrition. And simply taking those kinds of supplements can raise the vibration. Then there's meditation, getting into a relaxed state of mind. And there are many different meditative techniques, and they all have a tendency to still the mind, get out of the constant chatter of the ways our mind can actually distract us as opposed to support us. And the more one can get into the quiet mind state, particularly if you get into the emotions of gratitude and appreciation, that will also create an enhanced vibrational state. And studies show, for example, that persons doing transcendental meditation for 10 years, that their biological markers suggest that over those 10 years, they haven't aged.
Wow, Dr. Todd, this is a really wonderful answer. Really, I appreciate everything that you share with us. And what separates us to connect to our higher self?
What separates us? Mm-hmm. Well, we're not disconnected. We're never disconnected. We're always connected. It's more a question of being aware of that and having access to the wealth of information that what we describe as the higher self, or a connection to what you could call universal mind or the mind of source. There again, it has to do with clearing our blocks to being consciously aware of that connection as much as, or much more even than whether we're connected. We're always connected. We can't disconnect from our higher source, but we can be unaware of it. So it's really more a function of becoming more aware. And part of it is clearing the blocks that I described, and then getting into meditative states and doing whatever practice or process will, as it were, increase somebody's vibration, as you say.
Yeah. I don't know, you used to have a course or training of biocodification and dental codification. Do you still are doing this training with them?
We've created a website called Mind Body Logic, and it's been our pleasure and privilege to have met some of the world's leading pioneers in this area. And it all goes back to an amazing German doctor who found that if you could get to the emotional core of a condition, and his focus was oncology, that was his specialty area, and he was reversing even extremely serious issues like cancer simply by knowing what their conflict was and doing a process to create conscious awareness of that, feel the emotion that had been suppressed or blocked, and becoming consciously aware of it, and then reconnecting the brain. So that was the original work. And then the next pioneer in that area was named Claude Sabat, a French person. And two of the leading pioneers that we bring to do seminars, and they have typically courses that are 4 or 5 modules long. A usual module is 2 days, sometimes 3. And it's about learning the landscape. So the core work would be, I would call it the psycho-emotional anatomy. So over 40 years or so of the evolution of this practice, virtually every part of the body has been decoded. And what that means is that the conflict of the foot is different from the ankle, is different from the knee, is different from the shoulder, is different from the brain. And depending upon what's being expressed in the biology, that lets us know, based on the anatomy of the system, of how a particular element of the anatomy, whether it's a bone or a joint or a tendon or a nerve or a blood vessel or an organ, based on what is being expressed biologically, we already know what the conflict is. And it's generally a single conflict or a very small list of conflicts. So you don't have to hunt the entire universe of possible conflicts. As someone who's learned this art, you've already learned the anatomy. And knowing that you can really be focused in the process of asking the right questions in the right way, in the right sequence, for the person to be able to find a back door to what's been blocked from their awareness and to ultimately release that. So the core work, and the person who teaches that course is Enrique Buran, and he is one of the students of Claude Sabat. That's, I would say, the fundamental understanding. The knowledge of how a big stress experienced in a state of isolation can literally drive that perceived experience, that particular type of conflict, goes to a very precise part of the brain, and that in turn corresponds to the organ that will be affected. And this is so powerful that the originator found that if there was a very strong conflict, you could even see it on a CAT scan. There's a type of appearance that looks like dropping a little pebble in water. And the center of that is sort of the center focus of where the conflict goes. And that region of the brain gets disconnected in awareness. So it's like that higher self issue that we're never disconnected from it. It's always there, but we might not be aware of it. It might be literally blocked from our perception. And one of the big things that does this is simply, unresolved conflicts, which can be ours or from our ancestors. So for example, if someone has the same name as an ancestor, like a mother, father, grandfather, uncle, or aunt, if they're given the same name, they're literally born to resolve the unresolved conflicts of that ancestor. Or if you have the same birth date as one of your ancestors, you're born to resolve what they didn't resolve in their lifetime. So that's a type of mission that someone comes in with, and without a process for becoming aware of it. And sometimes it happens spontaneously, and people have immediate relief, and that corrects it for themselves and their ancestors going forward and backward. Or it's done through a systematic or intentional process. So that's the core of it. And then there's Isabel Benavides, also a student of Claude Sabat, and she starts with the core work, the core information that Enrique teaches, and then she's developed many more methods of resolving the conflict. So if you know the conflict, it's one thing, but then there's a lot of art and elegance to allowing that which is deeply buried in the unconscious to become highlighted or lit in that person's awareness so that they can see it, process the emotion, and be free of it. The third area, the third pioneer that we bring in to do trainings is a third generation orthodontist. And that's, of course, someone who specializes in the challenges with the teeth and the related anatomy. So teeth, dental bone, gums, the shape of the palate, the even the way the mouth closes is also very tied in to especially one's ancestral conflicts. So, and his name is Dr. Fabian Brodos, and he and Enrique are from Uruguay. And it's quite extraordinary because each tooth means something. And everything that happens with each tooth means something, as well as the gums and the bone. And unlike the other decoding processes where the person has to speak, has to answer questions to the degree that they can bring these hidden things into their awareness. If Dr. Brodos has a so-called panographic X-ray of the mouth, which is showing all the teeth and the dental bone. Without their saying a word, he can write a 32-chapter book about their ancestors, those relationships, and their personal relationships. And many things in the mouth can improve or even resolve by clearing the conflicts related to the dental issues. Thus, there's this evolving science of psycho-emotional medicine where physical and even psychiatric problems can be resolved by getting to the core of the conflict. The training of Dr. Buran, we've had him here a number of times, and of course, during the pandemic, because it's been hard to travel, there's been a suspension since 2020 of having the in-person events, which we're hoping to resume this year. And with the multiple trainings, he has authorized our leading team member, Mary Kennedy, to teach the first 2 modules of his 5-module program, which he's now expanding to a 6-module program. And that's sort of the prerequisite to do the further work with Enrique. And those courses are becoming available online as well, so people can start getting this information. And to me, whether someone becomes a practitioner or not, for everyone, the root is resolving these deep conflicts. Literally, we're born with the mission of resolving these issues for ourselves and for our clan. Mm-hmm. And there's probably almost nothing more powerful than resolving your internal conflicts in terms of overcoming limitations, be capable of doing more and more, having better and better health, overcoming physical, emotional, or psychological issues. So whether someone decides they're going to study at a level to actually be a practitioner of the art, even just the personal awareness that comes from doing the training. Because as you become aware of a conflict for a given system, like the conflict of the shoulder is a conflict over doing something new in the world. Just knowing what the conflicts are and then knowing your own physiology and physical and or psychological issues, just the awareness of what the conflicts are can sometimes connect the dots. So just doing the training to understand the process is also a profound personal journey of accelerated self-evolution.
Yeah, this is incredible that right now we have all these those possibilities that we can resolve all this problem.
It's very powerful.
Yeah, it's amazing. Can you share one more time the name of the website?
Yeah, it's called mindbodylogic.com.
Great, thank you for sharing. Dr. Todd, can you tell us more what are the stem cells and why are they so important?
Sure.
Thank you.
The first thing that's important to understand is that stem cells have received a lot of attention, and they're incredibly important in our biology, that virtually every system of the body has its own type of stem cell, or even the brain has 3 types of stem cells that are already in it, that are about replacing cells that have become damaged or injured or literally just old and worn out. And the complexity of the field is that when someone says stem cell, there's a tendency to think it's just one thing. And the reality is there are many dozens of types of stem cells in the body, and they have different levels of function and different levels of potency. So I'll go through the basic landscape, and then knowing the landscape, you can see that if someone says stem cell, if you really want to understand and put it in a context, you really have to be clear on what type of stem cell it is, what tissue it comes from, and what that stem cell is capable of doing. Because just saying stem cell is very generic, and one can really miss the understanding if you do not go deeper into the exact understanding of what it is and how it was derived. So the most powerful type of stem cell derives from the early stages of embryogenesis. So when an egg is fertilized and it starts to divide in the early stage, those very first cells are incredibly powerful. And these would be called true embryonic stem cells. And mostly these are derived from in vitro fertilization. And that's cool because one of my main scientific colleagues, the one with whom I've done the most publishing, he's a Dr. Peter Hollins from the United Kingdom. And he was part of the team that actually discovered and developed in vitro fertilization. I think there's, in his book, he stated that there are 100,000 people alive today that were born by the use of this technology that probably would never have been born. And that work was ultimately awarded the Nobel Prize with the leader of his team, Sir Robert Edwards. And I believe that was 2010. So these very early cells are called totipotent. So true embryonic stem cells, toti means everything. So a single cell can make a whole new person. So they're very powerful. Yet the challenge is, this is the one type of stem cell that's prone to create benign tumors called teratomas. And a teratoma is really, really weird. They can grow quite big. They can be as big as an orange or a softball, or even as big as a cantaloupe. And they can literally be hairballs with hair and skin and teeth and nails and bone and cartilage and blood vessels, any of the tissues of the body. And while these are benign tumors, one doesn't really want a giant hairball somewhere inside their body. So embryonic stem cells, there's been a moral issue about it because of their being derived from early stage embryos. And you can also argue that if 8 embryos are made in IVF and 2 of them are used and the parents have made all the children that they want, that normally those embryos would simply be incinerated. So the argument is, well, is it better to incinerate them because they won't be used, or possibly have some of those cells serve as medical therapeutics? So there's a so-called ethical issue around their use, but more than that, there's a medical issue. And because they can form tumors, it's a decision that we've made that until that problem is overcome, it's better not to use them anyway.
Okay.
Now, just after embryonic, you have something called pluripotent, which means that the cells won't make a whole new person, but they're so powerful that they can make anything in the body. Early in the embryonic process, the embryo splits into what are called 3 germ layers. There's endoderm, mesoderm, and ectoderm. And each of those germ layers produce particular kinds of tissue. This is relevant in decoding as well, because there are particular conflicts and issues that relate to the germ layers themselves. So just knowing the germ layer from which an organ is derived, you know the general types of conflicts that may be related to that organ. Now, a pluripotent stem cell can actually become any of those germ layers, which means then that it can literally become anything and everything in the body, become new neurons in the brain, new heart and muscle cells, new kidney, new liver, new cartilage and joints, and so forth. Thus, the pluripotent stem cells literally may be the most generally useful and effective if the goal is to regenerate the body and make it younger. And then after that, there are germ layers. So there's the 3 types of germ layers. And then there are germ cell layer stem cells that can become preferentially tissues of that germ layer. So for example, a popular type of stem cell is called mesenchymal, and those are often derived from someone's fat. They can also be derived from the bone marrow, and some places use mesenchymal stem cells even from the blood of the umbilical cord. And these cells want to become mesodermal tissue. So tissues of that layer would include, for example, cartilage, bone, tendon, muscle, and fat. So if the goal is to regenerate that kind of tissue, mesenchymal stem cells are designed to restore more youthful cells in those types of tissues. And then you ultimately have what would be specific tissue stem cells. So there's a particular type of stem cell in the liver, a different type of stem cell in the heart. There's a type of stem cell in the skin that actually resides in the hair follicles, and that regenerates our skin and also regenerates our hair. Wow. The brain has 3 types of stem cells. So you can see that if someone says in stem cell therapy, it is such a broad term, it really doesn't say much about how the cell is derived or what it might be able to do. And also in the stem cell world, there's a distinction between something that comes from the same person, and the medical term for that is allogeneic, I'm sorry, let me restate that. From the same person, it's autologous. Auto means the same. But if it's from another, it's allo or different, so allogeneic. So autologous stem cells come from the same person. They can come from various tissues and be prepared in various ways. And the big advantage of that is that we know it's a perfect match for that person. It has the same transplant tissue antigens, and we know that we can deliver that without a person having any type of rejection response. Whereas the allogeneic coming from another, then you get into significant issues of whether that tissue will simply be rejected or destroyed by that person's immune system. And if someone's immune system is weak and those cells become immune cells, for example, the transplanted immune cells can actually attack the host, which is called graft versus host disease. So it's much safer and much easier to use autologous cells from the same person as opposed to allogeneic. Now, it is possible to do tissue typing of donor and recipient, and if it's a close tissue match, just like any other transplant, like a heart or a liver or a kidney transplant, then those cells may be accepted, but there's a lot more care that needs to be done to do so-called allogeneic stem cell treatment safely. And as you can see from this discussion, if you want the ability to rejuvenate all of the tissues from head to toe, then the best type of cell to use is a so-called pluripotential stem cell, because it's safe to use. It doesn't have the challenge of forming great big hairballs in the belly, which, you know, might not kill you, but you don't want that. And yet they are able to replace, you know, or regenerate almost any organ, system, or tissue. The big discovery in this world, and it's the area that we're really focusing on, is a very unique and powerful type of cell called a very small embryonic-like stem cell. And embryonic-like means it's just past embryonic, but it's no longer truly embryonic. And it's been shown that this type of cell doesn't form the big hairballs. So that's good.
Yes.
What you could call a divine gift is that for unknown reasons, this type of cell, and the acronym would be VSEL, again, for very small embryonic-like stem cell. And for simplicity, we often just call them V cells. And what's an incredible divine gift, as I see it, is that for unknown reasons, these cells go into hibernation around the time that we're born. And because they're hibernating, they're sleeping, they're not metabolically active, they're not dividing. And because they're not dividing, they're not aging. So there are two DNA aging clocks. One is telomeres, the ends of the chromosomes. And because they're not dividing, their telomeres remain long, like newborn baby cells. No matter how old someone is, even over 90 years old, they'll still be as long as essentially a newborn baby. And the other clock is called DNA methylation, which is part of the so-called epigenetic clock that Bruce Lipton talks about. And these are switches that turn genes on and off. Then each type of cell has its own epigenetic methylation pattern. And just like telomeres tend to shorten, the methylation tends to become less over time. So that if the telomere is shortened by 50% or the methyl group placement drops by 40%, that tends to limit the human lifespan. These V cells basically have a newborn clock for the DNA aging clock. And because they're pluripotential, they can go into any tissue, and based on what the cells in that tissue communicate to them and the differences in chemistry between one tissue and another, that's what gives the cells the signals of what to become. So you get neurons in the brain, or heart muscle cells in the heart, or cartilage cells in a joint. We have uniquely been able to create a process to awaken the sleeping cells.
And how is that?
We talk nicely to them. We say, wake up, please.
It's incredible how the science has advanced, and how everything is connected, and we have all the tools to improve our life, no?
Right. No, it's amazing, actually. These cells weren't even discovered until about 2006.
I remember that when I was in Spain, living in Spain, the royal family, at that time she was a princess, right now she's a queen, I don't remember her name, but she had her first baby, and she decided to take her stem cells, and everybody was talking about that. It was really a revolution.
Right, right. Well, it's a good thing to do. It's a good thing to do. Those stem cells from the umbilical cord can be very useful to that person if they develop certain types of health conditions. So if people say, should I save my baby's cord blood? I say, yeah. I mean, it's better to have it than not to have it. Exactly. It could be life-saving if that child developed a disease like leukemia or lymphoma, so that the cells could restore their bone marrow if they had to have an aggressive treatment. But also, we know that at least 3 of the 6 transplant antigens are the same for that parent. And for such an early stage cell, even a 3 out of 6 match works well. So whether they're used for the baby or used for a first-degree relative, which can be for that person or basically their parents or their brothers and sisters, that the cells could be very beneficial. So I generally recommend saving them. They're a good thing to have. Cord blood is really powerful. There's actually many types of stem cells, including these so-called V cells. Now, the fact that these cells are newborn is really important. And also the fact that they're very small is quite useful in terms of how they can be applied. The first part of our process is really simple. It only requires drawing blood to get these cells. And we published an article in December of 2020 showing that when we separate these cells from blood and apply the laser that we've invented for this process, that almost immediately we get counts that are about 2.5 times higher. So we have a way to rapidly increase the numbers and, more importantly, to awaken them from their lifelong slumber. It's kind of like, Sleeping Beauty got kissed by the handsome prince and coming awake.
That's so cool, no?
The other thing that's important is that they're very small. Now, I mentioned the mesenchymal stem cells from fat. It has been shown that those cells undergo an aging process. So that type of stem cell from a 20-year-old tends to be very powerful and active, but if someone is 90 years old, they tend to have basically gotten old and they don't work very well at all, not usually. So there's a big difference with mesenchymal stem cells from fat, for example, whether that person is at a younger age or an older age biologically. And there's a point at which they tend to work less and less well. The other issue is that they're also relatively large. So the typical size in terms of biological sizes is about 12 to 30 microns, which is small, but not really small enough, because if you give them IV, the first place they go to is the right side of the heart and then to the lungs before they can go anywhere else. And the average diameter of a capillary in the lung is only about 6 microns. So you have the mechanical challenge of getting a 12 to 30 micron ball through a 6 micron tube. It's just physics. They get mechanically filtered out. And very few of them actually make it into the general circulation where they might help to regenerate another tissue. So the mesenchymal cells may get old and less effective, and they also may simply be too big to get where you want them to go without doing some other invasive process like a cardiac catheterization to get the cells to the heart, for example. Whereas the V cells that we work with are really very small. They're typically 1 to 4 microns, and they can easily get through the 6 micron capillaries in the lung and go everywhere. So if the first step of our process is just to draw blood, typically about 60 cc's, and then separate the cells that are in the blood from everything else. So we remove the red cells and the white cells, and we're left with a lovely preparation of plasma, platelets, the growth factors in the plasma, and these sleeping so-called V cells. Then our laser process increases the number very rapidly and also makes them metabolically active. We published a second paper, which is pretty heavy. It's biophysics.
Okay.
So we were actually using crazy physics stuff like the time-independent Schrodinger wave equation, differential equations, and Hamiltonians. And we presented the theoretical argument that what the laser is doing is providing the right type of energy in the right timing to break a series of what are called salt bridges between amino acids. That's simply where you have a positive charge on one amino acid that attracts to a negative charge on an amino acid from another part, either of that same protein or a different protein. And our model is that we separate a protein that blocks a receptor on the V cell. That blocking protein is called EpiX4, and the receptor is called CXCR4. And by literally using resonance, using frequency to shake away the protein that blocks it, the antibodies that are used to measure the cells can get to it. So we don't believe that we're increasing the number of the cells, but we are making them more easy to count, that we remove that which blocks the ability of the system used to enumerate them to be able to count them. And that method is called flow cytometry, where antibodies are used that have fluorescent tags. And when the antibody is attached to the protein on the cell, it goes through a device that then uses a certain type of laser to cause the antibodies that are tagged literally to glow in the dark. And that's how the cells can be counted and measured. So we get an immediate, roughly 2.5-fold increase in the countable numbers of the cells. So the number of cells is important because it's basically how many cells that will be present to be able to regenerate various systems in the body. And the second part of it is, even more importantly, that the cells awaken. And we've actually seen that these little cells, after they're stimulated that way, actually grow bigger. So they go from being almost no bigger than the size of a nucleus, or 1 or 2 microns, to having more cytoplasm. The fluid part of the cell gets bigger, and they even start to divide. So the increase in number as well as the activity of the cells is very important. And then when we give the cells intravenously, because they're small enough to go through the lung, they can literally go everywhere in the body from head to toe, small enough to cross the blood-brain barrier and get it into the brain and create, bigger, more neuroplastic, more connected, smarter brains, or regenerate the heart or the liver or the lungs or any other organ. So when we do a treatment, we get a general head-to-toe age reversal effect. And then another aspect to this new type of laser that we call for now the so-called Qi laser, or QI, which stands for quantum information. But Qi is also the term used in Chinese medicine for life force. So it has like the advanced scientific quality, but also gets into like sort of the root of energy medicine, like basic life force. So this type of laser has the ability to penetrate much more deeply than ordinary laser. And at the wavelength that we use, the color that we use, normally only go about 5 millimeters through tissue. And there's a part of the waveform that may actually go all the way through the body from one side to the other. And our early experiments gave us the eureka moment that we stumbled upon a type of homing frequency for the stem cells. Wherever we point the beam, the cells tend to go there, and even more importantly, to adhere or stick there. And what we like to say poetically is that we are literally singing the song of the stem cells in light.
Wow.
So from the quantum sense, we are increasing the probability that a stem cell goes to the part of the body where we want it to go. And everybody differs or can differ in terms of what their greatest need is biologically to have a rejuvenation effect. So the laser is useful for 2 very important things. One is to awaken the cells from their lifelong slumber and increase the countable number of cells. And then also as a guidance mechanism to increase the likelihood or to increase the number of cells that go where we want them to go.
Dr. Todd, this is amazing. and this is available for everybody right now?
It's available now.
Oh, that's so
like
cool.
Today.
And,
I know.
Oh, and how can the people connect with you? Because this is really amazing.
Thank you. So there is a website that has some basic information. It's called Keygenics, for the key laser, QIGENIX.com. And for more information, people can email to info@keygenics.com. And if they wanted to take the next step, there's even a general information number, which is 844-347-4737.
And what is the most important about the stem cells?
The muy importante and actually amazing is that in the past year, we've actually been able to do a test which measures a person's biologic age at the DNA level.
Mhm.
And this is done using something called the Horvath clock, developed by a Dr. Stephen Horvath at UCLA.
Mhm.
And this is a way of literally scanning the DNA for where those methyl groups are placed, the location, as well as the number of them. And he's developed a way that just by doing a simple test like a blood test, you can have your biologic age at the DNA level.
Mhm.
And the lab that does it for us is so precise, they give us someone's biologic age to 2 decimal places, which in scientific terms is pretty precise. And what's been remarkable is that when we do one of these treatments where we awaken someone's sleeping 1-day-old stem cells that are known to be pluripotent and can make anything, is that the usual result is that even within 6 to 12 weeks, is that their biologic age is measured at about 3 years younger than before the treatment. And the effect is cumulative. So if people have had 2 treatments, they tend to be 6 years younger. And we've even seen people with 4 treatments that are literally 12 years younger biologically than their birth date and before we did the first treatment.
That is so awesome.
It is awesome. We're pretty excited about it.
Yes, it is amazing.
And that's the most that's been seen in history so far.
Yeah, it's incredible. I am reading your book, Growing Younger, and it is amazing. Well, the vocabulary is a little bit difficult for me, so I have to go slower. But it's incredible. It's really, really, really good. And how far can we go with the longevity?
So longevity has many aspects to it. And probably the most powerful way to turn back the aging clock is the work with stem cells.
Mhm.
Yet the body needs more than just new cells. The body also needs the nutrition, literally the building blocks to make new cells, the chemistry that provides fuel, that supports reducing oxidative stress, that has to do with chemical balance, detoxification. And another part of the equation for regeneration is nutritional chemistry. And we've created a company called Gematria, Gematria, that has produced a series of formulas that are also enhanced with the laser energy. And from agriculture, for example, we have very interesting data. And this is work we actually do with a Spanish-speaking colleague from Mexico, who is someone who has done decades of research in agriculture and has developed biodynamic formulas for improving the soil biology and micronutrients that a plant gets. And as I understand from him in agriculture, that if you increase the yield of a crop by 7% or more, that's considered significant. And so we did some large-scale studies funded by grants from the government of Mexico. And the first was 1,000 hectares, and the second was 2,000 hectares. And in English terms or US terms, that would be 2,500 acres and 5,000 acres. And a 10-acre study would be considered significant. So this is a very big study in agricultural terms. And his formulas are sprayed on the leaves and stems. It's called a foliar application. And we had control plants without the nutrient formula. We had plants that were treated with the formula, and then we had plants that were treated with the laser enhanced formula. And the results were really pretty spectacular. So his biodynamic formula increased the yield of the plants by about 20%, which was quite good and quite significant. It also tended to increase the nutrient density, this was in non-GMO beans, of about typically double. So instead of 8 parts per million of zinc, there was 16 parts per million, for example. And that's a big increase in nutritional content.
Exactly.
Well, what was really interesting is if those same formulas were enhanced with our laser process, that instead of 20% more yield, there was 60% more yield. So it literally tripled the increase in yield, and even more profoundly increased the actual nutrient density in the plants. So instead of double the zinc, there was 5 times the zinc. Instead of the copper going from undetectable to 1 to 2 parts per million, the copper was 5 times greater after the laser to 5 to 10 parts per million. And we typically saw a 2 to 3-fold increase in the actual nutritional content of the food compared to just using the unlasered formula. So we saw a very significant increase in the bioavailability and biological activity. Growing Younger shows the results of clinical studies for anti-aging in people. And the main story in Growing Younger is the story of using DNA and RNA for cell regeneration. There was an amazing study done in 1970, or at least published then, by Dr. Max Odense. And he looked at rats that were very old. And this particular strain of rats lived normally 800 to 900 days. And he started his experiment when they were 750 days old. So they were literally at the end of their lifespan, like doing a longevity study in 90-year-old people. Mm-hmm. And the control animals had their normal life expectancy. So within 150 days, all those animals had moved to the animal lab in the sky, whereas the treated animals lived a minimum of 850 additional days. So the minimum result was literally doubling the lifespan. Yeah. And the longest lived animal had an increase of 1,500 additional days, nearly tripling the lifespan. Wow. And what was used was once-a-week injections of DNA and RNA. And what's important to know is that if you basically take a supplement with DNA and swallow it, the GI tract destroys almost all of it. So there's 2 types of DNA bases. There are the purines that are thymine and cytosine, mm-hmm. And that's about 95% destroyed by the GI tract before you even absorb it. And then the purines, adenine and guanine, they are 99% or more destroyed. So almost none of it gets absorbed. And that can become uric acid. So if you try to take a lot of DNA and RNA, you can actually overload the system and create uric acid problems. And one of the complications of that is known as gout. Classically with a big, hot, inflamed joint of the big toe. So what's important for that is a delivery mechanism, and most of the studies showing great results, whether for boosting the immune system or increasing the rate of regeneration of the liver, or for restoring the integrity of the lining of the intestines, used DNA and RNA that was given by injection. Mm. So we've developed a way to give that to the body, which is literally spraying it under the tongue, and then it can be absorbed directly. And we did a clinical study with that formula, and we call it Methuselah, after Methuselah in the Bible, Genesis 5:27, where Methuselah was said to have lived 969 years. And personally, I think that kind of longevity is possible again, between what we're doing with stem cells and nutrition and the work of other researchers around the world. And I'm beginning to connect the dots with the leaders in those areas as well, that we may literally lift the barriers of what we thought the human lifespan can be, and not just living longer, but actually turning back the aging clock and living a lot longer in young, very capable bodies. So we did a clinical study to look for what we would call age reversal effects. And the placebo group did 6 sprays a day, but it was just basically a flavored solution without active ingredients. And the treated group had the active formula. And everyone was told to walk briskly 30 minutes a day and use 6 sprays of the formula a day. The control group had essentially no change in their metabolic characteristics. The body muscle and body fat remained about the same. Aerobic capacity actually got a little bit less. In contrast, the treated group, in just 2 months, gained about 10 pounds of muscle while having 15 pounds of weight loss and increasing their aerobic capacity by 8%. Wow. So their biology was roughly 8 to 12 years younger in just 2 months by combining the formula with something as simple as walking 30 minutes a day. So Growing Younger tells that story. It gives a good bit of research on the many areas where it's been shown that giving DNA and RNA has very profound biological benefits. And then the icing on the cake is a clinical study showing significant age reversal effects for people, especially if they combine it with physical exercise, even something as simple as just walking briskly for 30 minutes a day. And then it shares a series of other clinical studies with formulas that focus on different aspects of health. There's one that supports the health of the liver that we now call Liver Spa, and an antioxidant formula that I believe in 2 weeks, the antioxidant levels in the body were increased by 25%. That increased to 50% by the 4th week. And there were many benefits in terms of what I will call quality of life indices. So people slept better, felt better, had more sense of calm. We've often seen that formula, which is basically an antioxidant formula with very concentrated phytonutrients from berries and green tea and other healthy things, that is designed to reduce oxidative stress in the body. So it showed it increased antioxidant levels while also having measured benefits in quality of life inventories. So Growing Younger is a very good way to learn about nutritional ways to rejuvenate the body. And the effects can be quite powerful, as we saw in the clinical study using Methuselah. So if people want to really understand it, to review the clinical studies and the data, then we're offering that to your listeners. And they can get that as a free download, just going to the Dr. Toddo site. And I'll give you that. It's simply Dr. Todd, DrToddo.com. And the homepage provides a download of the Growing Younger book. And I also wrote a document for the natural ways to make yourself stronger with respect to COVID too, so they can get that report as well.
Everybody wants to keep young. Is any age recommended to take your supplement?
There are some supplements that it's recommended to wait till you're 18.
Okay.
So for example, we have an arginine formula, which we have a published clinical study showing some very good benefits for cardiovascular health. because it can have effects on growth hormone, even though it's theoretical and not proven, and that might possibly affect bone growth in a younger person, it's recommended to wait until someone is 18 to take that formula. Whereas the Methuselah, it's interesting that one of the things that formula milk lacks relative to breast milk is nucleic acids. So human breast milk has a high content of nucleic acids, whereas formula milk does not unless it's supplemented for that specifically. So the Methuselah would be appropriate, even for young children, so that they get what they need to actually build their young, healthy bodies.
I think that besides, look younger and look good, it is very important to feel health, to be healthy, don't depend of the other, to be independent. And this is really amazing, to see this, that is something that you are doing. And I love it. I really love it. Thank you so much.
Right. Well, I'd say our main theme, even more than longevity, even more than living a long time in a young body, it's really about the human potential.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, how long can we live? How healthy can we live? How creative can we become? How much ability can we unlock? How much ancestral conflict can we clear in our lifetime? So it's all about, I would say, the intention of constantly becoming enhanced versions of ourselves.
Yeah, yeah. Right now we have all the tools to do that.
A lot more than ever before.
Yeah, it's amazing. Would you like to talk about the pineal gland?
Sure.
Okay.
The pineal gland,
Mhm,
as you probably know, is roughly in the center of the brain,
mhm,
and it's an organ of perceiving light.
mhm.
So you probably know that certain reptiles, the pineal gland is actually on top of the head. It's literally like a physical third eye, and it's constantly monitoring daylight versus nighttime, light versus darkness. And in our brain, because it's inside, not outside, it's strongly connected to the optic nerves and the visual pathways. So our eyes and brain are monitoring when it's daylight, when it's nighttime. And the pineal gland sets the pattern of what we call the circadian rhythms, which is the daily clock.
Mhm.
And there are cycles of the hormones. For example, cortisol, the stress hormone from the adrenal, tends to be high in the morning and get lower during the day and is lowest late in the afternoon, and then starts to go higher again. So there's a cycle for cortisol and other hormones of the levels in the body, in the blood, depending upon the time of the daily cycle it's in. And the pineal is even related to the longer term biologic cycles, like when we go into puberty, how long women continue their menstrual cycles, and so forth. So it's really intimately related to the cycles of time. It's also the gland that produces melatonin, which helps us go to sleep. And there are now studies that show that taking even relatively large amounts of melatonin have many beneficial effects, including immune enhancement, longevity effects, anti-tumor effects, and so forth. So the pineal is integral just in our literally hour-to-hour chemical biology. And at the esoteric level, the pineal gland associates with what we would call the crown chakra. And when that gets awakened, it's said to be the blossoming of the 1,000-petaled lotus of enlightenment. And the pineal tones are ancient sound and sound patterns that have the intention of increasing the vibration of and the function of and the awareness potential of the pineal gland. These tones and patterns that I've been inspired to develop were the byproduct of a cryon channeling. And that's where we met, which was at a Lee Carolyn Cryon event. And at one of our seminars, and when we're not in lockdown, we tend to do trainings that we call life extension seminars. So we go through the various aspects of the ways to use mind, body, and practices for personal rejuvenation, as well as expanding personal abilities. And at one of these events, Lee Carroll came in as kind of the grand finale, like he does at his events. And he told this interesting parable. And the parable was that a man wakes up one morning and there's this giant block of granite on his front lawn. And it was so big that there was no crane or machine big enough to remove it. And he was really perplexed until he got a brilliant inspiration. And he hired a sculptor. And then the sculptor created the most beautiful work of art the world had ever seen. And Cryon interpreted that to say that our DNA is like that. That we have in our DNA everything that we need for mastery, and that access is blocked by what he described as an 8-dimensional filter. So in this esoteric construct of 12-dimensional DNA, he was saying that 4 dimensions, which are our usual daily reality, 3 dimensions of space and 1 of time, that most people are locked into a limited 4-dimensional reality. And to unblock that and to operate from all 12 and all the information and abilities in all 12, you need to remove this so-called 8-dimensional filter. And during a morning of meditation, it was a weekend, and it might have been the afternoon. I think it was like early afternoon that I started. And using my inner vision, I looked at this so-called filter, and I began to spontaneously produce tones.
Oh, wow.
And the principle of resonance, I saw the filter starting to vibrate. As I continued the tones, it vibrated more and more until it hit what I would call an ignition point or a kindling point, and the matter of the filter transmuted into energy that then awakened what looked like lots of little tiny processors, at least metaphorically, in the DNA. So it wasn't just clearing the filter itself could be transmuted to energy to awaken the system. And that gave rise to what I call the first level of the pineal tones. And it came with a series of affirmations, first, second, and third person. In the first person, it was, I as a being am eternally pure and perfect, and anything that appears to be other than perfection is merely the illusion of this experiment of our experience. And that was also in the second and third person, you as a being and we as beings are. And the point really was remembering our divine eternal perfection. So even just singing the first set of tones, level 1, is already charting a remembrance of who we are, our origins, and what we're really capable of.
That is wonderful. That is wonderful. When was this awakening?
That was 2004.
Wow.
And then every few months I would get another level and another level. And when it got to the 8th level, there was an event in Moscow where we gathered a large group of people to do very intensely the 8 levels we had at that time. And at that gathering as well, Lee Carroll came in and shared information. And what he said was, the tones that I was sharing are accurately recalling what was done tens of thousands of years ago. And that these tones were about awakening interdimensional DNA. It's like a series literally of keys and codes and literally turning the key within a lock to open the treasures that are there. And said that even in ancient times, where at least according to Cryan, I had legendary longevity and was the architect of temples of rejuvenation, that I stayed very young for a very long time just using the tones that I just shared. And that the people that were in the audience would live longer lives for having been there that evening.
Oh, wow.
And that it also created a permanent portal that forever raised the vibration of Moscow.
Wow. Oh, wow. And do you teach these tones?
Yeah, I've actually just created a series of training videos with Lee Carroll that eventuated in the first Lemurian choir, which Cryan said was recreating that event with precision that he said was shockingly accurate. And at that first event, which was on the date of the end of the Mayan calendar, which was 12/21/2012, we had over 900 choristers gathered. And Cryan said the last time there were 800. When I asked who remembers being with me the last time we did this, over half the group raised their hands. So it was like a 26,000-year appointment to come together and do this again. And that created this amazing, you can imagine like hundreds of people in a room singing these patterns. And when I was given the assignment to recreate a Lemurian choir, I was told that the pairs are designed, or the tones are designed to work in pairs. So when I got the assignment, I had 16 levels and I was told, well, you need to remember 8 more. And they're done in pairs. And he took us to a place, a type of stadium, thousands of years ago, where 800 people were gathered and half of the group was singing one tone pattern and half was singing the other. So a lot had to be remembered and reconstructed. And we were all very happy when the first Lemurian choir went as well as it did. And there were many profound healings and experiences and awarenesses that happened related to it. And Cryan also said that we had unlocked a whole system of planetary nodes and nulls. And the nodes are these power points like Glastonbury, Mount Shasta, the Mayan Riviera. And so since then, we've done choirs at these various power points that are called the nodes, and each node has a corresponding null. And that's, it is said, where the crystalline grids of the earth are very weak as opposed to the nodes where it's very strong. So it's kind of like a battery. And that now that we've activated all the nodes, the next step will be to integrate it as a system of clearing thousands of years of accumulated negative planetary energy from the not so great things that people do to and with each other. And also to start awakening, further long dormant aspects of our deeper DNA. So that's in the works, and the training videos are going to be released soon so people can actually systematically learn the tones and tonal patterns. And that's available at pinealtones.com, pinealtones.com. And even if someone doesn't go to the choir, the training process is quite powerful because one gets to sing and experience the tones. I'm even going to provide footage from past choirs where people can hear what it sounds like, not just the individual tones as they learn them, but how it sounds together in pairs when a large group is singing it.
That is so cool, no?
And those that are inspired, we were going to have this choir in Maui, but because of travel restrictions, we've decided we're going to move it to the Mayan Riviera where we had our second choir. So it'll probably be in Cancun, and the date is 11/11/22.
This is a perfect day. Well, Dr. Todd, it has been a pleasure to have you here. Thank you so much. Dr. Todd, can you tell us where can we find you?
So the place to get the free downloads of things I discussed is Dr. Toddo, DrTodddo.com. And the Pineal Tones information, which I think would really benefit almost anyone, is Pineal Tones, PinealTones.com. The psycho-emotional medicine information is mindbodylogic.com. And if you like, I'll close by sharing the first level of the tones. People can get a little,
Oh, wow. Go ahead.
a little feel for it as opposed to just talking about it. And the intention of this level that we call level 1 is remembering your divine eternal perfection. You can sing along if you want to.
Gosh. I prefer not to. I prefer to receive it.
Okay, so here it goes.
Thank you, Dr. Todd. It's powerful.
Thank you. De nada.
Muchas gracias, Dr. Todd. De verdad, it is powerful. Thank you so much for being here with us.
Un placer. Muchas gracias.